Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today I'm just making another iceberg about the final and disturbing photos with eerie backstories. The last iceberg on this topic only had final photos with disturbing backstories, but this one will also have some photos that are not final. Instead, they appear normal on the surface but have backstories that truly are disturbing. And I discovered this when I started making the video, because now I'm sure these stories will be circulating in my head for years. Especially the Josef Fritzl one that you're going to hear about pretty soon. So yeah, that's all I had to say, and I guess let's just begin the video now with our very first entry, the oubliette. This seemingly ordinary grid is in fact a gateway to one of the most terrifying and inhumane punishments of the medieval period. Medieval Britain was a harsh time to be alive, and one of the most brutal reminders of that era is the oubliette, a dreaded medieval torture chamber. The oubliette at Warwick Castle in the UK is a particularly grim example. It is a long, narrow, horizontal chamber lined with jagged stones that protrude from the floor. Prisoners were forced to lie on these stones, with the ceiling just inches above them, leaving no escape from the agony of their confinement. This horrific chamber was designed with a single point of entry and exit, a trapdoor located far above the prisoner, completely out of reach once they were inside. The image that appears to show an old drainage grid is actually the trapdoor leading to this torturous cell. Prisoners were lowered into the deep shaft by a guardsman, and once they reached the bottom, the rope was pulled up and the trapdoor slammed shut, sealing their fate. Trapped in a narrow passage too tight to sit or kneel, prisoners had only two choices: to stand or lie flat until they succumbed to starvation. Occasionally, food and water might be thrown down, but more often they were left to die in excruciating pain. The oubliette was a place where prisoners were not just confined, they were forgotten. On April 28, 1945, Adolf Hitler was captured in what would be his final photograph. Alongside his aide Schwab, he stood outside the entrance to the Führerbunker in Berlin, surveying the extensive bomb damage to the Reich Chancellery. With Germany on the brink of total defeat after 6 years of war, this image marked the last time Hitler was seen alive. Just a day later, on April 29th, Hitler married Eva Braun in the bunker and composed his final will and testament. In this document he declared, "To avoid the disgrace of deposition or capitulation, my wife and I choose death. It is our wish to be immediately burned at the site where I have carried out the majority of my work in the service of my people over the past 12 years." On the afternoon of April 30th, 1945, Hitler and his new wife withdrew to their private quarters, where they ended their lives. Later, members of the bunker discovered Hitler slumped over the arm of a couch, having followed his physician's advice by simultaneously biting down on a cyanide capsule and zooming himself in the head. Eva Braun was found at the opposite end of the sofa, having taken cyanide as well. 2 days after their deaths, on May 2nd, Berlin surrendered to the Soviets, and just over a week later, on May 8th, World War II in Europe came to an end. Despite reports of Hitler's suicide, the Soviets claimed his remains were not found, suggesting he might still be alive. This sparked numerous sightings and widespread speculation that Hitler had somehow escaped. The uncertainty surrounding Hitler's fate has fueled conspiracy theories well into the 20th century and beyond, with some of his followers finding it hard to believe that he would have ended his life in such a manner. The photograph taken on April 28th serves as a chilling reminder of the final days of the Third Reich and the demise of one of history's most infamous figures. The Moors murders stand as one of the most harrowing chapters in British history, casting a long, dark shadow over the nation. The heinous acts committed by Myra Hindley and Ian Brady are still deeply unsettling, not only due to their brutality, but also because many questions remain unanswered. Myra Hindley was born on July 23, 1942, in Crumpsall, Manchester. Her childhood was troubled, shaped by a strict and sometimes abusive father. Despite being a bright student, her life took a tragic turn when she met Ian Brady in 1961. Ian Duncan Stewart was born on January 2, 1938, in Glasgow. His early life was marked by poverty and instability, and he developed a disturbing fascination with Nazi ideology and sadistic literature. When Brady moved to Manchester in the late 1950s, his path crossed with Hindley's, and together they formed a deadly pair. They met while working at Millward's Merchandising, quickly progressing from casual colleagues to something far more sinister. Brady drew Hindley into his warped worldview, and deeply in love with him, she adopted his twisted beliefs. Together, they began orchestrating a series of kidnappings and murders that would horrify the nation. Between July 1963 and October 1965, they targeted vulnerable victims, often children. Hindley would lure their unsuspecting victims by gaining their trust, while Brady would overpower them, leading them to the desolate moors. There, they subjected their victims to unspeakable horrors, capturing their final moments in photographs and recordings. Their reign of terror came to an end in 1965 when David Smith, Hindley's brother-in-law, witnessed Brady attacking a young man named Edward Evans. Shocked by what he saw, Smith alerted the police, leading to Brady and Hindley's arrest. During the investigation, a photograph surfaced showing Hindley crouching on the moors, holding her pet dog. At first glance, the photo seemed innocent, perhaps taken during a walk or to mark a spot of interest. However, when the police compared the image with the landscape, they realized it marked the burial sites of their victims. Hindley is seen crouching over the exact spot where one of their victims was buried. The discovery of these graves was both a breakthrough and a heartbreak. On October 10, 1965, the police unearthed the body of 12-year-old John Kilbride from a shallow grave, right where Hindley had been photographed. The search continued, and in July 1987, more than 2 decades after her murder, the remains of 16-year-old Pauline Reed were discovered, identified with the help of Hindley's photographs. Their trial began on April 19, 1966, lasting 14 days. By that time, the death penalty had been abolished, so Brady and Hindley were sentenced to life in prison. Brady received 3 concurrent life sentences, while Hindley was given 2. In 1989, Brady admitted to 2 additional murders, but he was never tried for them. He died in 2017 at the age of 79, while Hindley, who became infamous as Britain's most evil woman, died in prison in 2002 at the age of 60. One of the most tragic aspects of the Moors murders is the unresolved case of Keith Bennett, one of their victims whose body was never found. Despite the passage of time, Brady and Hindley never revealed the location of his remains. As John Ainley, the solicitor for Keith's mother Winnie Johnson, pointed out, searching for his body on Saddleworth Moor without precise information is like trying to find a needle in a haystack. Although the remains of Pauline Reed, John Kilbride, Leslie Ann Downey, and Edward Evans were eventually recovered, Keith Bennett's body remains lost. Winnie Johnson passed away in August 2012, never knowing where her son was buried, a devastating lack of closure that haunts the case to this day. In August of 2011, Steve Jobs stepped down as CEO of Apple, a position that had been central to his career and his impact on the tech industry. He remained involved with the company until just before his passing on October 5, 2011. A photograph taken 2 months before his death outside his California home shocked many as it showed a frail and visibly weakened Jobs, reliant on a friend's support due to his ongoing struggle with cancer. Steve Jobs is widely regarded as one of the most innovative and influential figures of our time. His leadership at Apple revolutionized consumer electronics, and he played a key role in the personal computer revolution of the 1970s and 80s. Beyond Apple, Jobs founded Next and was the chairman and majority shareholder of Pixar, leaving a lasting legacy in the world of technology and innovation. Jobs' health took a serious turn in 2003 when a CT scan, initially done for kidney stones, revealed a shadow on his pancreas. This led to the diagnosis of a rare, less aggressive form of pancreatic cancer. Despite the optimistic outlook if treated early, Jobs initially avoided conventional medical treatment. Instead, he tried alternative methods like acupuncture, dietary supplements, and juice fasting. He even consulted a psychic and was influenced by a doctor promoting untested therapies. It wasn't until 9 months later that he finally agreed to surgery, but by then, the cancer had spread. The delay in seeking traditional treatment had grave consequences. Although the surgery in July 2004 successfully removed the tumor, Jobs chose not to follow up with chemotherapy or radiation therapy. By August 2006, during Apple's annual Worldwide Developers Conference, his emaciated appearance and his decision to delegate much of the presentation raised concerns about his health, indicating the return of his cancer. Realizing the ineffectiveness of alternative treatments, Jobs eventually turned to cutting-edge experimental therapies, including a 2009 treatment in Switzerland that used a radioactive isotope to target problematic hormone-producing cells. He also underwent a liver transplant, but these measures only temporarily slowed the progression of his illness. In his final days, Jobs expressed regret for delaying conventional treatment. Born on April 9, 1935, in Amstetten, Austria, Josef Fritzl grew up in a modest environment, eventually pursuing engineering and landing a stable job. He married Rosemary, and together they had 7 children, presenting the image of a perfect family in their large, well-maintained home. But beneath this seemingly ideal life, Fritzl concealed a horrifying nature, one that would only come to light in the most shocking way imaginable. The first signs of his true character emerged in 1967, long before the world knew his name. At 32, Fritzl broke into the home of a 24-year-old nurse in Linz, assaulting her while her husband was away, threatening her with a knife. This wasn't an isolated incident. That same year, Fritzl was implicated in another attempted assault and had a history of indecent exposure. Despite these serious offenses, he only served 12 months in prison. Fritzl's criminal activities didn't end there. His name has been linked to several unsolved deaths. In 1986, a 17-year-old girl named Martina Claudia Pasch vanished on her way to catch a bus. Her body was discovered days later on the shore of Lake Mondsee, wrapped in tarpaulins. She had been strangled shortly after her disappearance. Fritzl and his wife operated a guest house near where her body was found, and Martina bore an eerie resemblance to Fritzl's daughter, Elizabeth. Although Fritzl was investigated, there was insufficient evidence to charge him. There were other unsettling cases too. In 1966, another 17-year-old, Anna Nair, was killed with a captive bolt pistol near Fritzl's workplace. In 2007, a 42-year-old prostitute named Gabriela Supakova was found dead near the Austrian-Czech border around the time Fritzl was vacationing there. Despite these connections, Fritzl was never charged, leaving behind a trail of suspicion and unanswered questions. However, these crimes pale in comparison to what Fritzl did next. On August 28, 1984, he set into motion a plan he had been preparing for years. His daughter Elizabeth had just turned 18, an age when most young adults begin to explore their independence. But Fritzl had other plans. For years, he had been converting the basement of their family home into a hidden prison. On that day, Fritzl asked Elizabeth to help him carry a door down to the basement. She had no reason to suspect anything sinister. This was her father, after all. But as soon as she held the door in place, Fritzl attacked her, pressing an ether-soaked towel to her face. Moments later, she was unconscious. When Elizabeth awoke, she found herself in a small, dark chamber, deep underground, with no way out. Her sudden disappearance did not go unnoticed. Her mother, Rosemary, reported her missing, desperate for answers. A month later, Fritzl handed a letter to the police, a letter he had forced Elizabeth to write. In it, she claimed to have run away and didn't want to be found. Fritzl even suggested to the police that she might have joined a cult, and shockingly, they believed him, closing the case. What Fritzl did to Elizabeth is almost beyond comprehension. After luring her into that basement, he didn't just imprison her, he turned her life into a nightmare that lasted nearly a quarter of a century. For 24 years, Elizabeth was trapped in a small dark space, no bigger than most living rooms. There were no windows, no sunlight, no fresh air. The walls were cold, the air thick and stale. This was a prison in every sense, designed to keep her hidden from the world. And it worked. For over 2 decades, no one outside those walls had any idea she was there, except for Fritzl. In the early years, Elizabeth was completely isolated, her only contact with the outside world coming through her father, whose visits were far from comforting. Fritzl would regularly descend into the cellar, not to check on her well-being, but to assault her repeatedly, crushing any hope she might have had for rescue. As the years passed, Elizabeth gave birth to 7 children in that dark, oppressive space. all of them fathered by Fritzl. 3 of these children were forced to live with her in the cellar, growing up in the same squalid conditions. They never saw the sun, never felt the breeze, never knew what life outside those 4 walls was like. Their entire world was confined to that cellar, a place of unimaginable horror. Meanwhile, Fritzl maintained a twisted facade of normalcy above ground. He took 3 of the children upstairs, raising them with his wife Rosemary, who had no idea where they really came from. Fritzl told everyone that Elizabeth had abandoned these babies, leaving them on his doorstep because she couldn't care for them. And shockingly, people believed him. Even the authorities never questioned his story. A key question arises: how did Fritzl manage to adopt these children, given his criminal history? Austrian law dictates that criminal records are expunged after 15 years. As a result, when Fritzl applied to adopt Elizabeth's children, the local social service authorities had no knowledge of his past offenses. The contrast between the 2 worlds Fritzl created is staggering. Upstairs, the children led relatively normal lives. They went to school, played outside, and were cared for by their unsuspecting grandmother. But downstairs, life was a daily struggle for survival. The space was cramped, the air thick with the smell of mold and waste. Elizabeth and the children who remained with her lived in conditions unfit for any human being. They had a makeshift kitchen, a rudimentary bathroom, and a few mattresses on the floor where they slept. The cellar was soundproofed, ensuring that no one could hear their cries for help. The heavy reinforced door that sealed them in was a constant reminder of their imprisonment. Despite this hellish environment, Elizabeth did everything she could to create some semblance of normal life for her children. As a result, she taught them to read and write using the few materials Fritzl provided, and she tried to protect them from the full horror of their situation, though there was only so much she could do. The toll this existence took on all of them was unimaginable. At times, Fritzl would punish them by shutting off their lights or simply refusing to deliver food for days. He also told Elizabeth and the children that they would be gassed if they tried to escape, even threatening to electrocute them if they tampered with the cellar door. While Elizabeth and her children endured this nightmare, Fritzl continued to live his life as if nothing was wrong. He was calm, composed, and utterly ruthless in maintaining his double life. He controlled everything: what they ate, how they lived, every moment of their lives. He held all the power and never let them forget it. Perhaps the most chilling aspect of this story is how Fritzl divided his life. In 1998, while his daughter and grandchildren were trapped in the cellar, Fritzl was on holiday in Pattaya, Thailand. The photo from that trip shows him smiling, relaxed, as if he didn't have a care in the world. But knowing what we know now, that image takes on a whole new meaning. While he was enjoying the sun, Elizabeth and her children were locked in darkness, cut off from the world with no hope of escape. For a whole month, they had no contact with anyone, not even Fritzl. This is the reality behind that image. A man on holiday, appearing to be a normal tourist, while his daughter and grandchildren suffered in silence, hidden away in a basement no one knew existed. In April 2008, the unimaginable finally began to unravel, not because of a heroic rescue, but because Elizabeth's oldest daughter, Kirsten, became gravely ill. After 24 years in that suffocating cellar, the conditions had taken a severe toll on everyone, but now Kirsten's life was in imminent danger. She was unconscious, and Fritzl knew he had no choice but to take her to the hospital. It was a move he likely agonized over, knowing it could expose everything, but ultimately he had to act. When Fritzl walked into the hospital with Kirsten, the doctors immediately sensed something was wrong. This wasn't just a sick teenager. There was something off about her appearance and condition. She was severely undernourished, and her skin was almost translucent from years without sunlight. Fritzl tried to spin a story, claiming that Elizabeth had dropped Kirsten off and then vanished into a cult. But the doctors weren't buying it. They called the police, and that's when the walls really started closing in on Fritzl. Back in the cellar, Elizabeth must have realized that this was it. This was the moment where everything could change. For 24 years, she had endured unimaginable horrors, living in constant fear and isolation. The police and doctors, already suspicious of Fritzl's story, now had Elizabeth in front of them, and she finally told them everything. The years of abuse, the confinement, the children born in that nightmarish cellar, she laid bare the full extent of Fritzl's atrocities. The police were stunned. It's unimaginable what it must have felt like to hear her story and realize that such an atrocity had been unfolding for so long, right under their noses. Fritzl was arrested immediately, and the carefully constructed walls of his double life began to crumble. News of the case spread rapidly, igniting a wave of horror and disbelief worldwide. How could this have happened? How could a father inflict such cruelty on his own daughter and grandchildren? For Elizabeth and her children, freedom marked the beginning of an entirely new battle. They were thrust into a world they hadn't seen in decades, a world that had moved on while they were trapped in that dark, hidden prison. For the younger children, it was their first experience of life beyond those four walls. Everything was strange and overwhelming, but at last they had the opportunity to truly live. Fritzl's days of deception and manipulation were over. He was charged with a litany of crimes: assault, incest, false imprisonment, enslavement, and the murder of one of the newborns who didn't survive the brutal conditions in the cellar. In March 2009, after a brief trial where Fritzl attempted to paint himself as a victim of his own compulsions, he was found guilty on all counts. The judge didn't hesitate. Fritzl was sentenced to life in prison, where he remains to this day. It's difficult to reconcile this grim reality with the image of Fritzl smiling on a boat in Pattaya, Thailand, taken in 1998. The sun is shining, the water is calm, and it looks like a typical vacation snapshot, the kind you'd find in any family album. But knowing what we do now, Elizabeth and her children were locked in that cellar, completely cut off from the world. They didn't even know if he would ever return. For an entire month, they were left to survive on their own in that hellish space, while Fritzl played the part of a carefree tourist. With Fritzl now behind bars and Elizabeth and her children finally free, the world is left to grapple with the chilling reality of what happened in that house in Amstetten. The story stands as a stark reminder that evil can hide in plain sight, cloaked in the guise of ordinary life. The man who seemed to lead an unremarkable existence in a small town was, in truth, a monster who inflicted unimaginable suffering on his own family. Elizabeth and her children now face the long, difficult path to recovery. They must learn to live in a world they were denied for so long, and find a way to heal from the trauma inflicted by the very person who should have protected them. The Burst of Joy photograph, captured on March 14, 1973, is one of the most iconic images from the Vietnam War era. It shows what appears to be a jubilant reunion between Lieutenant Colonel Robert Al Sturms and his family, seemingly embodying the relief and happiness of a soldier's return home after 5 years as a prisoner of war in North Vietnam. The image, which won the Pulitzer Prize, quickly became a symbol of hope, healing, and the end of the Vietnam War, resonating deeply with the American public. However, the story behind the photograph is much more complex and far less joyful than the image suggests. Just 3 days before this picture was taken, Robert received a letter from his wife, Loretta, informing him that their marriage was over. During the years of his captivity, Loretta had moved on, becoming involved with other men, and even receiving marriage proposals from 3 of them. The seemingly happy reunion captured in the photograph was in reality the prelude to the collapse of the Sturms family. The following year, in 1974, Robert and Loretta divorced. The court awarded Loretta 43% of Robert's military retirement pay, and she also received the family home, custody of their 2 young children, and $300 a month in child support. Robert, on the other hand, was left with little financial security and ended up living with his mother. The emotional toll of his captivity and the unraveling of his personal life made it impossible for him to display the famous photograph. He reportedly said, "I survived the torture, the mock executions, the dreadful days and nights, only to return and be handed a Dear John letter by a chaplain upon my release." Burst of Joy stands as a poignant reminder that appearances can be deceiving, and even the most celebrated images can hide stories of pain and heartbreak. In 2004, investigative journalist Matt Birkbeck published a book titled A Beautiful Child, which brought widespread attention to the disturbing story of Franklin Delano Floyd and the then unidentified woman known as Sharon Marshall. This work was instrumental in uncovering the true identity and tragic life of Suzanne Marie Savakis. The harrowing tale was further explored in the 2022 Netflix documentary Girl in the Picture, which delved deeper into Suzanne's experiences. The story traces back to the 1970s with a seemingly ordinary photograph depicting a man and his daughter. The man in the photo is Franklin Delano Floyd, and the young girl beside him is actually his stepdaughter, Suzanne Marie Savakis. Suzanne was the daughter of Sandra Frances Brandenburg, who had a brief marriage to Floyd, a man already known for theft and sexual offenses. Sandra had 4 children, including Suzanne, from 2 different fathers. In 1975, shortly after marrying Floyd, Sandra was sentenced to 30 days in jail for passing bad checks. During her incarceration, she entrusted her children to Floyd's care. Upon her release, Sandra discovered that Floyd had vanished with all her children. While she eventually located 2 of them, Suzanne and her youngest child, Philip, remained missing. Floyd kept Suzanne with him in Georgia, where she lived under the alias Sharon Marshall and was presented as his daughter. In 1988, Suzanne gave birth to a son, whom she placed for adoption. She and Floyd later moved to Tampa, Florida, where Suzanne worked as an exotic dancer. That same year, she gave birth to another son, Anthony Michael Hughes. In 1989, Floyd and Suzanne married in New Orleans using the names Clarence Marcus Hughes and Tanya Dawn Tadlock, officially changing Suzanne's name to match her new identity. By April 1990, Suzanne had plans to escape Floyd's control and start anew with Kevin Brown, a college student with whom she had been secretly involved. She intended to take her son Michael with her. Tragically, in the same month, Suzanne was found severely injured on the side of a highway, approximately 100 miles from Oklahoma City, in what appeared to be a hit-and-run incident. She succumbed to her injuries shortly after. When Floyd arrived at the hospital the next day, he claimed that he had fallen asleep at a Motel 6 while Suzanne had gone out to buy groceries. At the time of Suzanne's death, both she and Floyd were suspects in the 1989 disappearance of Cheryl Ann Camesso, an 18-year-old fellow exotic dancer who had vanished following a heated argument with Floyd. After Suzanne's passing, Floyd placed Michael into foster care and left the state. It was later confirmed that Floyd was not Michael's biological father. In 1994, Floyd brazenly abducted Michael from his school in Oklahoma, holding the principal at gunpoint during the kidnapping. Michael was never seen again. 2 months later, authorities arrested Floyd in Louisville, Kentucky. He eventually confessed to murdering Michael on the day of the abduction by shooting him twice in the back of the head, though Michael's body was never recovered. The mystery of Cheryl Camesso's disappearance was solved in 1995 when her skeletal remains were discovered near Interstate 275 in Pinellas County, Florida. That same year, a mechanic in Kansas found a large envelope inside a truck that had previously belonged to Floyd. The envelope contained photographs that provided evidence of Cheryl's murder, leading to Floyd's arrest and conviction for the crime. Floyd was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to death. He died of natural causes on January 23, 2023, at the age of 79 while on death row. The heartbreaking story of Suzanne Marie Savakis came to light through dedicated investigative work, revealing the extent of the abuse and horror she endured under Franklin Delano Floyd's control. Her story has since been widely shared, shedding light on the profound impact of kidnapping and abuse, and honoring the memory of a life tragically cut short. The case of McArthur Wheeler and his accomplice Clifton Earl Johnson is a notorious and almost comedic example of the Dunning-Kruger effect in action. This psychological phenomenon occurs when individuals with limited knowledge or skills in a particular area greatly overestimate their own abilities. Wheeler's story is particularly memorable for the sheer absurdity of the plan he concocted. On April 15, 1995, Wheeler and Johnson set out to rob 2 banks in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Remarkably, they did so in broad daylight and without any attempt to disguise themselves, at least not in any conventional sense. Instead, Wheeler had come up with a unique and utterly flawed idea. He believed that applying lemon juice to his face would render him invisible to security cameras. This strange belief was rooted in the fact that lemon juice can be used as invisible ink. Wheeler, having apparently misunderstood this concept, thought that if lemon juice could hide writing, it could also hide his face. To test his theory, Wheeler reportedly covered his face in lemon juice and took a Polaroid photo of himself. When his face didn't appear in the photograph, he became convinced that his lemon juice mask was effective. It's likely that the camera malfunctioned, the film was bad, or he simply failed to point the camera correctly. Nonetheless, Wheeler, brimming with confidence, moved forward with his plan. During the robberies, CCTV cameras clearly captured images of Wheeler as he walked up to bank tellers with a gun in hand, his face fully visible. Despite this, Wheeler was certain that he was invisible. Johnson was quickly apprehended, but Wheeler managed to evade capture for a brief period. His delusion was shattered when the surveillance footage was broadcast on Crime Stoppers, leading to his arrest within an hour. This bizarre incident not only led to their capture but also attracted the attention of psychologists David Dunning and Justin Kruger. Their subsequent research into this phenomenon led to the formal identification of the Dunning-Kruger effect, which illustrates how people with low ability in a certain area often lack the self-awareness to accurately assess their own competence. Wheeler's misguided belief in the power of lemon juice perfectly exemplifies how a lack of understanding can lead to grossly overestimating one's abilities, sometimes with laughable and criminal consequences. Two young women are seen posing cheerfully inside what seems to be the remains of an old crane machine. What they likely don't realize is that they are sitting in one of the most radioactive objects within the Chernobyl exclusion zone, the site of the infamous 1986 nuclear disaster in Pripyat, Ukraine. This object, known as the Death Claw, still emits dangerously high levels of radiation despite the many years that have passed. In 2019, archaeologist Rob Maxwell used a Geiger counter to measure the radiation levels of the claw and found them to be more than 100 times higher than the highest standard levels of background radiation. Touching or being inside it is extremely hazardous. Spending just a few hours near such radioactive material significantly increases the risk of developing cancer, and spending an entire day with it could lead to symptoms of radiation sickness, requiring immediate medical attention. Another serious risk is the radioactive dust that can stick to clothing, potentially causing long-term health issues if carried around. This photograph appeared in 2024, though the exact date it was taken remains unclear. We can only hope that these two girls did not suffer any harmful effects from their encounter with the claw, but only time will reveal the consequences. In February 2013, the Bronx neighborhood of Morrisania was horrified by the discovery of dismembered human remains scattered in garbage bags and suitcases. The victim was identified as 45-year-old Tanya Byrd, a mother living with her son, Basid McLean. Initially, Basid claimed he hadn't been able to contact his mother for days and appeared to be in distress. However, this emotional display quickly unraveled as investigators delved deeper into the case. Surveillance footage from the area revealed a shocking twist. Basid and an associate, William Morris, were seen purchasing a Black & Decker power saw at a hardware store shortly after the murder. The police arrested both men, each of whom blamed the other for the killing. William claimed Basid had confessed to murdering his mother while they were on the subway, and then asked for his help in disposing of the body. Basid, on the other hand, accused William of committing the murder during a visit to their apartment, and said he only helped remember his mother out of fear. As investigators searched Basid's phone, they uncovered something even more disturbing than they had anticipated: a selfie of Basid posing with his mother's severed head, taken shortly after the murder. The image, which eventually went viral, suggested that Basid had taken the photo as a twisted trophy or as a way to intimidate others. This gruesome evidence, along with the discovery of the power saw and other tools in the apartment, left no doubt about Basid's involvement. He eventually confessed to the murder, chillingly stating in a video, "If you can kill somebody, you should be able to cut them up too. If you can't do that, if you don't have the stomach to cut them up, then you're a coward." Authorities believe that Basid's motive stemmed from his mother's pressure on him to grow up, move out, and become independent. Basid's defense team tried to argue that he was hearing voices at the time of the murder, and was not fully responsible for his actions. However, this defense was rejected, and Basid was sentenced to 25 years to life in prison. Tragically, the violence in this family did not end with Basid's crime. His ex-wife, Zara Coombs, later killed their 4-year-old son, Zamer, after he accidentally dropped an egg on the floor. Zara knocked him unconscious with a broom, and then placed him, still alive, in a plastic container filled with water. For this crime, she was sentenced to 17 years in prison. The series of events surrounding Tanya Byrd's murder and its aftermath left a haunting legacy of violence and tragedy in the family. At 6:30 a.m., Filippo Berri, a 28-year-old from Malo, Italy, shared a cheerful selfie with his brother, accompanied by the words, "Look where I am." Berri, an avid mountain hiker, was ascending the Marmolada, the largest glacier in the northern Italian Dolomites, located on the border between the Trentino and Veneto regions of Italy. Tragically, just 20 minutes after sending that message, a large portion of the glacier broke off, causing an avalanche of ice, snow, and rock to cascade down the mountain. Filippo Berri, a father of one, was among the 11 people who lost their lives in the disaster, with 8 others injured. He was one of the first victims to be identified, just an hour after the photo was taken. Dennis Rader, known as BTK, which stands for Bind, Torture, Kill, was a notorious American serial killer responsible for the deaths of at least 10 people between 1974 and 1991 in Wichita and Park City, Kansas. Despite the horrifying nature of his crimes, his wife Paula Dietz, whom he married on May 22, 1971, and their 2 children, Carrie and Brian, had no idea they were living with a psychopath. To them, he was a devoted father and husband, a respected community member, a Cub Scout leader, and even the president of the church council at Christ Lutheran Church in Wichita. Rader's killing spree began in January 1974 with the brutal murder of 4 members of the Otero family in Wichita. He had a pattern of taking souvenirs from his victims, and in this case, he took a watch. Just 4 months later, he murdered 21-year-old Catherine Bright after breaking into her home. That same year, Rader left a note in a book at the Wichita Public Library describing the Otero murders and introducing himself as BTK, stating, "The code words for me will be bind them, torture them, kill them." Over the next 2 decades, Rader claimed the lives of at least 5 more women. Frustrated by the lack of media attention, he sent a letter to a local TV station asking, "How many people do I have to kill before I get a name in the paper or some national attention?" After an 8-year break, Rader resurfaced, murdering Maureen Hedge and later another victim, before the case went cold again. In 2004, on the 30th anniversary of Rader's first murders, a local newspaper speculated that the killer had either died or been imprisoned. To prove them wrong, Rader sent a reporter items belonging to his 9th victim, Maureen Hedge, including her driver's license and photos of her body. Over the next year, he continued to taunt the media, sending packages with clues and souvenirs from his crimes, often using cereal boxes to label himself a serial killer. In January 2005, the police made a crucial breakthrough. Rader sent a note asking if a floppy disk could be traced, and the authorities, through a classified ad, assured him it would be safe. When Rader sent the disk, it led the police back to his church, where they matched his DNA to evidence from his first crime scene. He was arrested in February 2005 and quickly confessed to his crimes. In June of that year, Rader pled guilty and was sentenced to 10 consecutive life terms, currently serving his time at the El Dorado Correctional Facility in Kansas. Examine these family photos. They appear to be ordinary snapshots, cherished memories of a father and his daughter on fishing trips, celebrating birthdays, and eventually walking her down the aisle on her wedding day. But there is a chilling truth hidden in these images. Hilda Clayton, the chilling photograph that captured the split second before a deadly explosion, is attributed to Hilda Clayton. On July 2, 2013, Hilda, a 22-year-old from Augusta, Georgia, was stationed in Jalalabad, Lagman Province, Afghanistan. She was part of the 55th Signal Company Combat Camera Unit, based in Fort Meade, Maryland, and was tasked with photographing Afghan National Army soldiers during a training exercise. As Hilda documented a live mortar firing, a tragic accident occurred, the mortar shell detonated within the launch tube. The explosion claimed the lives of both Hilda and an Afghan National Army soldier, a photojournalist she had been training. In a tragic twist, the photograph that recorded the blast was taken at the very instant the explosion enveloped her. This striking image underscores the significant dangers faced by soldiers, not only in battle, but also during training. Although there were other photos of the incident, this particular image, taken by Hilda in her final moments, stands as a powerful testament to the ultimate sacrifices made by military personnel, even in preparation for war. Hilda was just 22 years old when she tragically lost her life while pursuing her passion, documenting the realities of combat. On July 19, 1991, a massive search was launched in the San Bernardino National Forest after 12-year-old Jared Michael Negrete vanished during his first overnight backpacking trip with the Boy Scouts. The group, which included 6 scouts and a scoutmaster, had been hiking toward the 3,500-meter summit of Mount San Gorgonio, also known as Old Grayback, the tallest peak in Southern California. As they neared the summit around 6 p.m., the scoutmaster realized with alarm that Jared was no longer with the group. Earlier in the hike, another group of hikers reported seeing Jared heading down the mountain alone, taking shortcuts through the vegetation instead of sticking to the winding trail. The scoutmaster, an experienced hiker, immediately led the remaining scouts down the mountain, assuming they would find Jared along the way. However, when they reached the designated meeting point at the base, Jared was nowhere to be found. After hiking 5 miles back to their base camp in the dark, the scoutmaster called for help. A large-scale search effort ensued, involving multiple law enforcement agencies, search and rescue teams, and thousands of volunteers. They combed through a 50-square-mile area, dedicating 45,000 hours to the search. After 3 days, searchers found a few clues: a footprint that matched one of Jared's high-top tennis shoes, along with beef jerky and candy wrappers. The most significant discovery was Jared's camera, which contained 12 photos. The last photo on the roll was a close-up of Jared's eyes and nose, taken in the dark with the camera's flash. It is believed that this photo was taken the night he disappeared. Despite decades of searching, no trace of Jared's remains has ever been found, leaving his disappearance an enduring mystery. Many have questioned the scoutmaster's decision to allow Jared, a first-time camper, to hike alone while the rest of the group continued their ascent. Usually in such hikes, the slowest members are positioned in the middle to ensure no one gets left behind. Regarding what might have happened to Jared that night, 3 main theories have emerged. The first theory suggests that Jared got lost during his descent. As night fell, he may have used his camera's flash to navigate, similar to the tragic case of Chris Kremers and Lassane Froon, 2 Dutch hikers who got lost in Panama and used their phone cameras to find their way in the dark. Jared might have slipped and fallen over one of the steep drop-offs on San Gorgonio, with his remains possibly hidden in dense brush or carried away by a river. The second theory is that Jared was attacked by one of the black bears known to inhabit the mountain. However, this is considered unlikely since no one reported hearing any cries for help. The third, and most unsettling theory, is that Jared was picked up by someone, either as he descended the mountain alone or when he reached the roadside at the bottom. Given that every inch of the mountain has been thoroughly searched over the past 32 years, some believe this could be the only explanation for why no trace of his body has ever been found. Yet there is no evidence to support foul play or any other scenario. To this day, the fate of Jared Negrete remains a mystery, with the final image on his camera serving as the only clue left behind. This photograph of Douglas Hegdahl, taken after his release, shows a man who looks frail and worn, a stark contrast to the sailor who once served aboard the USS Canberra. Yet his story is one of remarkable cleverness and survival. On April 6, 1967, during the Vietnam War, Petty Officer Second Class Douglas Hegdahl was aboard the USS Canberra in the Gulf of Tonkin when a blast from a 5-inch gun mount knocked him overboard. After hours of swimming, he was rescued by Vietnamese fishermen who handed him over to local militiamen. Suspecting him to be a high-ranking officer or spy, the militiamen beat him severely before imprisoning him in the infamous Ho Lo prison. Understanding the peril he faced, Douglas quickly devised a plan to make himself seem insignificant to his captors. He pretended to be unintelligent, earning the nickname the incredibly stupid one from the Vietnamese. He claimed he couldn't read or write and fumbled through their attempts to teach him. His performance was so convincing that his captors eventually gave him more freedom within the prison. In reality, Douglas was anything but stupid. Using his newfound freedom, he gathered crucial intelligence. With the help of fellow prisoner U.S. Air Force officer Josef Fritzl, he memorized the names, capture dates, and personal details of around 256 fellow prisoners, using a secret tap code to communicate. He even memorized the route to Hanoi when he persuaded his captors to take him there for new glasses. Believing Douglas to be worthless as a prisoner, the North Vietnamese released him on August 5, 1969, along with 2 other prisoners, as part of a propaganda effort. Once back in the United States, Douglas provided critical information about military and intelligence personnel, many of whom were thought to be dead. In 1970, during the Paris peace talks, Douglas shocked the Vietnamese by revealing the extensive knowledge he had gained about their prison camps. His testimony about the brutal conditions and torture inflicted on prisoners led to changes in how American POWs were treated, saving many lives. Douglas Hegdahl's story is a powerful example of how appearances can be deceiving. What seemed to be the tale of a simple, unintelligent man was actually the story of a brilliant mind who outwitted his captors, gathered vital information, and played a key role in the eventual release of many American prisoners of war. In April 2008, Brazilian priest Adelir Antônio de Carli embarked on a daring and unconventional mission to raise awareness for his plan to create a spiritual rest stop for truck drivers. His method of choice was to break the world record for a clustered balloon flight by attaching hundreds of helium-filled balloons to a chair. The journey began in the southern port city of Paranaguá, where a photograph captured Father de Carli waving just before takeoff, a moment filled with hope and determination. As he ascended into the sky, he initially reached an altitude of 20,000 feet before descending to 8,200 feet, aiming to travel toward Dourados, a destination 462 miles northwest of his starting point. Father de Carli took several precautions for the flight. He wore a survival suit, selected a buoyant chair, and carried both a satellite phone and a GPS device. However, there was one critical oversight. He did not know how to operate the GPS properly. Mid-flight, he called for assistance to learn how to relay his location to rescuers, indicating that he was struggling to navigate. Tragically, this lack of preparation led to disastrous consequences. About 8 hours after his launch, Father de Carli lost radio contact with port authorities and was reported missing. Blown off course by the winds and unable to provide his exact location, he drifted out to sea. Despite extensive search efforts, rescuers were unable to locate him, and his body was not found until more than 2 months later. Father de Carli's faith and determination were undeniably strong, but his balloon flight ended in a tragic and unintended outcome, bringing attention to his cause in a way he had never anticipated. On July 20th, 2011, Amy Winehouse attended a performance at the Roundhouse in Camden, London, to support her goddaughter, Dionne Bromfield. After the show, a photo was taken of Amy smiling alongside Dionne, hinting at what appeared to be a positive turn in her life. Tragically, this would be the last photograph taken of Amy. Just 3 days later, on July 23, 2011, Amy was discovered dead at her home in Camden Town at the age of 27. Her bodyguard, who had tried to wake her around 10 a.m. but thought she was just sleeping, returned at 3 p.m. to find her still in bed and unresponsive. Emergency services were called, but Amy was pronounced dead at the scene. Her sudden death prompted comparisons to other musicians who had passed away at the same age, a group often referred to as the 27 Club. The subsequent inquest revealed that Amy had died from an accidental alcohol overdose, with a blood alcohol level more than 5 times the legal limit. The coroner concluded that the amount of alcohol she consumed had unintentionally led to her sudden death. Amy Winehouse first made waves in the music industry in 2003 with her debut album, Frank, which received critical acclaim. Her powerful voice drew comparisons to legendary jazz and rhythm and blues singers like Dinah Washington and Billie Holiday. In 2006, her fame skyrocketed with the release of Back to Black, a multi-Grammy award-winning album. However, as her musical career flourished, Amy's personal life became increasingly troubled, marred by substance abuse issues. Following the success of Back to Black in both the UK and the US, Amy's appearance began to change noticeably. She grew thinner, covered herself in tattoos, and adopted her iconic beehive hairstyle. Her marriage to Blake Fielder Civil in May 2007 coincided with more erratic behavior, including slurred performances and an arrest in Norway for marijuana possession. In January 2008, a video surfaced online showing Amy apparently smoking crack cocaine. As a result, she was denied a visa to attend the Grammy Awards in Los Angeles, where she won multiple awards. She accepted them via satellite from London. Despite her personal struggles, Amy's extraordinary talent continued to earn her admiration from fans and critics alike. However, her life continued to spiral downward, leading to her divorce from Fielder Civil in July 2009. 2 years later, an attempted comeback tour was cut short after she appeared intoxicated during the opening concert. Though there were moments when she seemed to be on the mend, Amy's battle with her demons ultimately ended in her tragic death. Natalee Ann Holloway, 18, was declared legally dead in January 2012, but her disappearance on May 30, 2005, remains one of the most perplexing cases in recent history. During a high school graduation trip to Aruba, Natalee was last seen socializing with friends, a moment captured in a photograph believed to be the last image of her alive. Shortly after this picture was taken, Natalee allegedly joined Dutch honors student Joran van der Sloot and his Surinamese friends, the Kalpu brothers Deepak and Satish, for a party in a back room. At approximately 1:30 a.m., she got into a car with the three men, and from that moment on, she was never seen again. Despite their claims of innocence, stating that they had dropped Natalee off at her hotel, Joran, Deepak, and Satish were questioned and even arrested multiple times. However, with insufficient evidence to prove their involvement, no charges were ever filed. On December 18, 2007, the Aruban prosecutors decided to close the case, but it was reopened on February 1, 2008, after a disturbing undercover video surfaced. In the video, Joran was seen confessing to killing Natalee and enlisting a friend to help dispose of her body. Although he later retracted this statement, and even claimed in another interview that he had sold her to human traffickers, a claim he also recanted. Many believe that Joran's father, a high-ranking judge in Aruba, might have used his influence to protect his son. The case took another turn in 2010, when Joran was indicted by an American court for attempting to extort $250,000 from Natalee's mother. He promised that in exchange for the money, he would reveal the location of Natalee's body. Although her mother sent a down payment, the information Joran provided was false. Then, on May 30, 2010, exactly 5 years after Natalee's disappearance, Joran was involved in another murder. He was convicted in January 2012 for killing 21-year-old Stephanie Flores Ramirez in Lima, Peru. According to his confession, Stephanie had discovered evidence on his computer linking him to Natalee's disappearance and confronted him, leading to her death. Joran was sentenced to 28 years in prison for the crime. In June of this year, Joran was extradited to the United States to face charges of extortion and wire fraud related to the Holloway case. He is expected to receive a severe sentence, but he has yet to be tried for Natalee's presumed murder. Even after 18 years, Natalee's whereabouts remain a mystery, though the leading theory is that her body was disposed of at sea. A recently discovered email from Joran to a contact read, "My dad got a boat 2 days later. We went for a ride and took care of things. That's all I'm going to say." Irma Grese, often referred to as the Beast of Belsen, became one of the most notorious figures during the Holocaust. This photograph of her as a 17-year-old blonde, blue-eyed girl might appear innocent, but it belies her true nature. By the age of 20, Grese had risen to become the second highest-ranking female SS overseer at Auschwitz, and later served as the warden of the women's section at Bergen-Belsen. Despite her angelic appearance, which Dr. Gela Perl, a female inmate doctor at Auschwitz, described as one of the most beautiful women I have ever seen, Grace was a sadistic and cruel individual. Dr. Perl noted that Grace's body was perfect in every line, her face clear and angelic, and her blue eyes, the most innocent eyes one could imagine. However, this outward beauty concealed a vicious and perverted nature that terrified the prisoners under her control. Gracie's cruelty was boundless. She patrolled the women's camps at Ravensbrück, Auschwitz, and Bergen-Belsen, constantly seeking out female victims to torment. Known for her heavy boots, whip, and pistol, she inflicted brutal punishments on the prisoners. Survivors recall her forcing prisoners to kneel for extended periods or to hold heavy rocks above their heads during long roll calls. In the freezing conditions of snow, ice, and rain, she would mercilessly beat those who faltered with a rubber truncheon until they lost consciousness. At Bergen-Belsen, Grace's brutality reached new heights. She significantly increased the death toll by ordering selection parades, much like she had done at Auschwitz. Although she only worked at the camp for a brief period of 3.5 weeks, her extreme cruelty earned her the notorious title of Beast of Belsen. In addition to her physical cruelty, Grace was also rumored to be a sexual deviant, engaging in relationships with both male and female prisoners. She was allegedly involved with Dr. Josef Mengele, the infamous Angel of Death, and Joseph Kramer, the commandant of Birkenau and later Bergen-Belsen. She even assisted Mengele during selections, actively participating in the decisions of who would live and who would die. Fortunately, Grace's reign of terror ended in January 1945 as the Red Army advanced into Poland. Her career of brutality caught up with her, leading to her arrest, trial, and eventual execution by the British. This is the unsettling tale of John Edward Robinson, a man who seemed harmless on the surface but was in reality a calculating and ruthless killer. In the photograph, he's wearing a yellow sweater and cradling a baby, a scene that might appear heartwarming at first glance. But beneath this seemingly innocent image lies a horrifying truth. The baby in the photo is Heather, who was raised by a loving family that had no clue about the dark history behind her adoption. In 2000, when Heather was 15 years old, she uncovered a shocking truth. The man she knew as her uncle, John Edward Robinson, was a serial killer responsible for the deaths of multiple women, including her biological mother. This revelation shattered Heather's world as she realized that the life she had always known was built on a foundation of deception and tragedy. The twisted story of Heather's adoption began in early 1985 when her mother, Lisa Stasi, encountered Robinson. Lisa was a 19-year-old mother trying to rebuild her life after a troubled marriage. She had a baby daughter named Tiffany and was desperate for a fresh start. Robinson offered Lisa a job, an apartment, and the chance at a new beginning, everything she needed to turn her life around. Trusting Robinson, Lisa was unaware of the danger she was about to face. On January 8, 1985, Robinson arranged for Lisa and Tiffany to stay in a motel in Overland Park, Kansas, promising that her new job and apartment would be ready the next day. That evening, Lisa called her family, filled with hope about her future. Tragically, this would be the last time they ever heard from her. The next day, Robinson tricked Lisa into signing several blank sheets of paper, which he later used to forge letters falsely stating that Lisa had decided to leave Tiffany in his care and disappear. After securing her signature, Robinson murdered Lisa. Although the exact details of her death remain unknown, it is believed that he strangled her and then disposed of her body, which has never been found. Just a few days after the murder, Robinson contacted his brother and sister-in-law, who had been struggling to adopt a child. He told them that he knew of a baby whose mother had committed suicide and offered to arrange the adoption for $5,500 in legal fees. Using the forged papers, Robinson facilitated the adoption of Tiffany, who was renamed Heather by her new family. They had no idea about the horrific events that had led to her becoming part of their lives. The photo of Robinson holding Tiffany, surrounded by smiling relatives, was taken just days after he had brutally murdered Lisa Stasi. It's chilling to see him smiling in that image, knowing the gruesome acts he had committed only days before. Robinson's crimes extended far beyond this one heinous act. His criminal activities began in the 1980s with various scams, including embezzlement and forgery. Posing as a successful businessman, he used his charm to manipulate those around him while hiding his sinister intentions. By the late 1980s, Robinson had escalated to even darker deeds, preying on vulnerable women by offering them jobs or financial assistance. Once he gained their trust, he would exploit and ultimately kill them, meticulously covering up their disappearances. In 2002, Robinson was tried in Kansas for multiple murders and was found guilty on all charges. He was sentenced to death for 2 of the murders and received a life sentence for the killing of Lisa Stasi. He remains on death row at the El Dorado Correctional Facility in Kansas. The case of John Edward Robinson is a profoundly disturbing story of deceit, murder, and unspeakable cruelty. What makes it even more chilling is Robinson's belief that taking the life of an innocent woman to give her baby to his brother and sister-in-law was somehow justifiable. His actions not only destroyed the lives of his victims and their families, but also deeply affected those who unknowingly raised the child of a murdered woman. Although Heather has since found some closure by learning the truth about her biological mother, the tragedy of what happened to her and the other victims at the hands of this twisted man continues to haunt those involved. In May 2023, a 23-year-old woman named Jung Yu Jung contacted a 26-year-old English language teacher in Busan, South Korea, under the guise of being the mother of a high school student seeking tutoring. Disguised in a school uniform, Jung arrived at the teacher's home, where she launched a savage attack, stabbing the teacher over 100 times. Even after the victim was dead, Jung continued her brutal assault. After the murder, Jung dismembered the body and packed the remains into a suitcase. She then took a taxi to a remote parkland near a river north of Busan to dispose of the suitcase. However, her plan quickly began to unravel when the suspicious taxi driver alerted the police about the blood-stained suitcase abandoned in the woods. As police investigated, they uncovered that Jung had become obsessed with crime shows and novels, which fueled her fixation on committing a murder. Her online search history revealed months of research on how to kill and dispose of a body. However, despite her careful planning, she overlooked the presence of CCTV cameras that recorded her entering and leaving the teacher's home multiple times, as well as walking down the street with the suitcase containing the body parts. Jung eventually confessed to the crime and was sentenced to life in prison, bringing an end to a chilling story rooted in her dark obsession with crime and murder. A photo of Jung Yu Jung might seem unremarkable, just a woman who could be on a trip or returning from one. But the reality behind that image is far more disturbing, as it hides the tale of a young woman whose fascination with crime led to a horrific murder. The Lawson family massacre is a tragic and unsettling story that leaves many questions unanswered. At first glance, the Lawson family's Christmas photo appears like any other. A father, mother, and their children, all dressed in their best, gathered together for a holiday snapshot. But behind this seemingly ordinary image lies a story so chilling that it has cast a dark shadow over the photo for nearly a century. In December 1929, just days before Christmas, the Lawson family, a typical farming family from Germantown, North Carolina, was preparing for the holiday season. They were known as a hard-working and close-knit family. One day, Charlie Lawson, the father, did something unusual. He took his family into town for a professional photograph. For a family like the Lawsons, this was a rare and expensive luxury, but Charlie insisted. The resulting photo shows them all dressed up, trying to look their best. Charlie, 43, stands unsmiling beside his wife Fanny, 37, surrounded by their 7 children. Arthur, 19, Marie, 17, Carrie, 12, Maybelle, 7, James, 4, Raymond, 2, and baby Mary Lou, held by Fanny. At the time, this gesture seemed like a fatherly act in anticipation of Christmas, but it would become the last photo ever taken of them all together. On December 25, 1929, what began as a normal Christmas day took a horrific turn. The eldest son, Arthur, was out hunting rabbits, a simple activity that ultimately saved his life. While he was away, Charlie carried out a gruesome plan. He first went to the tobacco barn, where his daughters Carrie and Maybelle were heading to visit their aunt and uncle. Waiting for them with a shotgun, Charlie shot them both and then bludgeoned them to ensure their deaths before hiding their bodies in the barn. Charlie then returned home, where his wife Fanny was on the porch, unaware of the horror that had just taken place. He shot her as well. The sound of the gunshot startled their daughter Marie, who screamed from inside the house. Her younger brothers, James and Raymond, tried to hide, but there was no escape. Charlie entered the house, found Marie, and shot her before killing James and Raymond. Finally, he turned to his youngest child, 4-month-old Mary Lou, and bludgeoned her to death. After committing these brutal murders, Charlie walked into the nearby woods, pacing around a tree for hours. What went through his mind during that time remains a mystery, but eventually he used his shotgun to end his life. The sound of his final gunshot was heard by a crowd that had already gathered at the Lawson property, drawn by the earlier news of the tragedy. When authorities arrived, they found the bodies of the Lawson family inside the home, arranged in a way that suggested Charlie had attempted to offer them some twisted sense of peace after the violence. Arthur, the only surviving member of his immediate family, returned home to this nightmare at just 19 years old, left to deal with the overwhelming grief and the responsibility of burying his loved ones. News of the Lawson family massacre spread rapidly across the country, shocking and horrifying the public. People were appalled that a father could commit such an atrocity against his own family, and the mystery of why Charlie did it intrigued them. The Lawson home even became a grim tourist attraction, with visitors taking pieces of the property as macabre souvenirs. Over the years, many theories have emerged about what might have driven Charlie Lawson to commit such a horrific act. Some suggest that his mental health had deteriorated in the months leading up to the massacre, possibly due to a head injury or a mental breakdown. Others believe that financial pressures during the tough economic times of the late 1920s may have pushed him to the edge. The darkest theory hints at a terrible secret within the family: rumors of an incestuous relationship between Charlie and his eldest daughter, Marie, who was allegedly pregnant with his child. While these theories offer possible explanations, none fully account for the brutality of Charlie's actions. The unanswered questions: why Charlie insisted on taking the family photo, why he carefully arranged the bodies, and what he wrote in the letters he left behind, leave the truth buried. The Lawson family massacre remains a story that continues to captivate and horrify, as much for what we don't know as for what we do. Rui Pedro Teixeira Mendonça was only 11 years old when he mysteriously vanished on March 4, 1998, from his hometown of Lousada in northern Portugal. That afternoon, around 2 p.m., Rui left home to ride his bike nearby, but he never returned. Before leaving, he had asked his mother if he could spend the day with Afonso Dias, a 22-year-old lorry driver and family friend. Although Rui's mother trusted Afonso, her husband didn't approve of their son spending time with an older man. She reluctantly allowed Rui to ride his bike in a nearby vacant field, but it's believed that Rui disobeyed her and went to meet Afonso instead. As suspicion grew around Afonso's involvement, authorities questioned him. Afonso became emotional during the interrogation, denying any knowledge of Rui's fate, but cryptically urging investigators to close the borders. Later, Rui's cousin Joao revealed that Afonso had taken Rui to visit an escort named Alcina Dias on the day he disappeared. Alcina confirmed that Afonso and Rui had visited her that afternoon, and that Rui seemed frightened and upset, as if he was forced to be there. After leaving her place in Afonso's car, Rui was never seen again. A month after Rui's disappearance, political commentator Nuno Rogero noticed something strange in one of his vacation photos taken at Disneyland Paris. In the background of a ride, he saw a boy who looked identical to Rui, sitting beside an unidentified man in a red jacket whose face was obscured. The photo was confiscated by investigators, but due to poor investigative work, it led to no new developments. Although the boy in the photo was never confirmed to be Rui, many, including his mother, believe it was him. Meanwhile, a local media campaign to find Rui was launched but was plagued by hoax calls, including disturbing ones placed directly to Rui's mother. She would answer the phone to hear a child's voice crying and calling her mama, which she was certain was her son's voice. However, the authorities never attempted to trace these calls, leading to widespread criticism of their handling of the case. Many in Portugal felt that the police had put little effort into finding Rui. On September 1st, 1998, authorities conducted a raid on members of the Wonderland Club, an international child exploitation ring. Among the 750,000 images and videos seized during the operation, 1,263 young persons were identified, including Rui. Despite this, no further leads emerged about his whereabouts. In 2012, Afonso Diaz was acquitted of any wrongdoing in connection to Rui's disappearance due to insufficient evidence. However, in 2014, he was sentenced to 3 years in prison for corruption of an innocent. He was never formally charged or convicted for his involvement in Rui's disappearance. Afonso was released after serving 2/3 of his sentence. Despite exhaustive search efforts, Rui Pedro Teixeira Mendonça has never been found. In 2019, he was declared legally dead, though the tragic mystery of his fate remains unsolved. This black and white family photograph from the 1940s shows Mary Westlake holding baby Geraldine, alongside her half-brother, Timothy Evans, and his wife, Beryl. At the time, Timothy, Beryl, and their baby were living in rented rooms at 10 Rillington Place in Notting Hill, London, sharing the house with John Christie and his wife, Ethel. While the image appears ordinary, the events that followed were anything but. Shortly after this photo was taken, Timothy Evans went to the police, claiming his wife was dead. An initial search of the building failed to find her, but a subsequent investigation uncovered the bodies of Beryl, baby Geraldine, and a 16-week-old male fetus in an outdoor washhouse. Beryl had been wrapped in a blanket and a tablecloth, and both she and her daughter had been strangled. The post-mortem also revealed that Beryl had been physically assaulted before her death. Evans initially accused John Christie of killing his wife during a botched abortion, but under police pressure, he confessed to the murders. However, he later retracted this confession and again accused Christie of both killings. Despite his retraction, Evans was put on trial for the murder of his daughter, with the prosecution choosing not to pursue a charge for Beryl's murder. Christie testified against Evans, detailing the couple's quarrels, which likely influenced the jury's decision. Evans was found guilty and, after a failed appeal, was executed at HM Prison Pentonville on March 9, 1950. In 1953, after Christie moved out of 10 Rillington Place, the bodies of 3 people were found hidden in a wallpaper-covered alcove in the kitchen. 2 more were discovered in the garden, and Christie's wife's body was found under the floorboards in the front room. Christie was arrested but was only tried for his wife's murder, despite confessing to the other killings, including that of Beryl Evans. However, Christie denied murdering baby Geraldine. He was eventually hanged for his crimes. It is now widely accepted that John Christie was responsible for the murders of both Beryl and Geraldine. In 2004, the High Court acknowledged that Timothy Evans did not kill his wife or child, recognizing that an innocent man had been wrongfully executed. Evans was posthumously pardoned that same year. The Evans case, along with the public outcry over this tragic miscarriage of justice, played a significant role in the eventual abolition of capital punishment in the United Kingdom. When this photograph was taken, the family could not have foreseen the horrors that lay ahead, nor could they have imagined that the tragic events they were caught up in would ultimately help change the course of justice in the UK. On December 16, 2008, the tragic case of 6-year-old Adam Walsh was officially closed by the police, with serial killer Otis Toole identified as the man responsible for his abduction and murder. After years of anguish, Adam's remains, which had been held as evidence throughout the investigation, were finally returned to his family for a proper burial, bringing a sorrowful conclusion to a case that had haunted his loved ones and the nation for decades. The nightmare began on July 27, 1981, when Adam Walsh went shopping with his mother, Reve Walsh, at a mall in Hollywood, Florida. While Reve briefly stepped away to check on an item at Sears, she left Adam playing at a kiosk with an Atari 2600 video game console. When she returned around 12:15 p.m., Adam and the other children were gone. A store manager later revealed that a security guard had asked the boys to leave after they argued over the game. Mistakenly thinking Adam was with the older boys, the guard let him leave the store with them. After searching the store and paging Adam without any success, Rivet called the Hollywood police at 1:55 p.m. The investigation eventually pointed to Otis Toole as the prime suspect. Toole had reportedly lured Adam into his 1971 Cadillac by promising him toys and candy, then drove north on Interstate 95 toward Jacksonville, Florida. As Adam realized he was in danger, he began to panic. Toole knocked him unconscious, drove to a deserted service road in St. Lucie County, and suffocated him. He then decapitated Adam with a machete and disposed of his body. 2 weeks later, on August 10, 1981, a severed head was found in a drainage canal near Vero Beach, roughly 130 miles from where Adam had been abducted. Despite holding out hope that Adam was still alive, the Walsh family was devastated when the remains were identified as his. The coroner determined that Adam had died from asphyxiation, likely several days before his remains were discovered. The rest of his body was never found. In 2011, former Miami Beach homicide detective Joe Matthews published a book titled Bringing Adam Home, revealing overlooked or ignored evidence in the case. One significant piece of evidence was an image showing the carpet inside the rear floorboard of Toole's Cadillac. The fluorescent blue color in the image came from luminol, a chemical used to detect blood, even when diluted up to 10,000 times. While DNA technology at the time of Adam's murder wasn't advanced enough to confirm whether the blood was his, the image clearly showed blood stains and what appeared to be a face imprint on the carpet. Sadly, the carpet was lost by the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office, and the blood found on the machete was never tested. Toole had confessed to killing Adam on 2 occasions, but later recanted both times. Known for making false claims about various crimes, his confessions complicated the investigation. However, on his deathbed in 1996, Toole finally admitted to his niece that he had indeed killed Adam. He died in prison at age 49, serving 5 life sentences for unrelated murders. The abduction and murder of Adam Walsh remained deeply tragic, compounded by the frustration and heartbreak his parents felt over the mishandling of the investigation. The loss of critical evidence and Toole's conflicting confessions only intensified their pain. With the case now closed, the Walsh family can only hope to find some measure of peace after such an unimaginable ordeal.